Family, this is Michael Imhotep, founder of the African History Network, host of the African History Network show, and host of my daily national radio show, the Michael Imhotep Show. Mod Hotep to everybody. I also run our Facebook fan page, The African History Network, The African History Network, where we have almost 900,000 followers on Facebook. So follow us on our Facebook fan page, The African History Network. I wanted to talk about this subject with Donald Trump. And is Donald Trump a racist? Okay. Last week and this week, he has called Hillary Clinton a bigot. Last week, we know he brought on as his campaign CEO Stephen Bannon, co-founder of Breitbart News, which is one of the leading white supremacist and conspiracy theory websites. Is known as the alt-right, the alternative right. And they were one of the sites who were leading the charge, stating that President Obama was not born in this country, leading the birther movement, all types of things like this. So you can see why Donald Trump brought them on, brought Stephen Bannon on as CEO of his campaign, because Donald Trump was the leading birther back in 2012. Okay, but there was an article from the New York Times, July 23rd, 2016, called "Is Donald Trump a Racist?" Is Donald Trump a racist? Okay, and it's a very good article. It's an excellent article, a lot of facts in it. And last night on today's the 26th, August 26, 2016. So last night, August 25th, 2016, on The Last Word with Lawrence O'Donnell, he interviewed the writer of this article. His name is Nicholas Kristof, okay, to really break down these facts and present this information. All right, so I wanted to share some of that here and then deal with some other information as well. All right, so a lot of people have heard about the lawsuit that the Department of Justice, it was actually Richard Nixon's Department of Justice in 1973, filed against Donald Trump and his father, Fred Trump. And in the article, Nicholas Kristof says that one early red flag arose in 1973. Okay, Donald Trump and his father, Fred Trump, were sued by the Department of Justice for systematically discriminating against blacks in housing rentals. Now, you may have heard a little bit about this. You can go do more research on this. Donald Trump was interviewed by Anderson Cooper. It was either last night or the night before, either Thursday night or Wednesday night, on CNN. Anderson Cooper asked him about this, about the details of this case. He seemed like he didn't know about it because they settled this case. Okay? They actually settled this case, and when asked some details, he seemed like he didn't know about this. He didn't know like the real details of the case. But in 2015, Donald Trump said he had the world's greatest memory. So how is it you don't remember? And this was a big case also. Now, Nicholas Kristof said that he went through 1,021 pages of documents from that legal battle. 1,021 pages of documents from that legal battle. And he said that they were devastating. He said Donald Trump was then president of the family real estate firm, and the government amassed overwhelming evidence that the company had a policy of discriminating against African Americans, including those serving in the military. To prove the discrimination, African Americans were repeatedly dispatched as testers to Trump apartment buildings to inquire about vacancies, and white testers were sent soon after. Repeatedly, the African American persons were told that nothing was available. Nothing was available, while the white testers were shown apartments for immediate rental. Now, a former building superintendent working for the Trumps explained that he was told to code any application by a black person with the letter C for colored, apparently so the office would know to reject the application. Okay. Now I'm still trying to ascertain who told him this. When Anderson Cooper confronted Donald Trump about this in the interview, was either last night or night before, Trump said he didn't know anything about a superintendent doing this or who told him. Okay, but you're supposed to have the world's greatest memory, but you don't know about a superintendent doing this, and this was in the lawsuit from the Department of Justice. Okay, now a Trump rental agent said that the Trumps wanted to rent only to, quote, Jews and executives, end quote, only wanted to rent to Jews and executives and discourage renting to African Americans. Now, Donald Trump furiously fought the civil rights lawsuit in the courts and the media, but the Trumps eventually settled on terms that were widely regarded as a victory for the government. 3 years later, the Department of Justice sued the Trumps again for continuing to discriminate against African Americans and not renting to them in their apartment buildings. Okay. Now, the article goes on to say, Nicholas Kristof, he goes on to say, in fairness, those lawsuits date from long ago, and the discriminatory policies were probably put in place not by Donald Trump, but by his father, Fred Trump. Now, Fred Trump appears to have been arrested at a Ku Klux Klan rally in 1927. Woody Guthrie, who lived in a Trump property in the 1950s, lambasted Fred Trump and recently discovered papers for stirring racial hatred. Okay. Now, we don't have any evidence that Donald Trump said back at this time of the lawsuit or even afterwards that it was wrong for them to discriminate against African Americans either. All right. Yet, even if Donald Trump's inherited his firm's discriminatory policies, he allied himself decisively in the 1970s housing battle against the civil rights movement. Okay. Then we have Donald Trump in 1989 with the Central Park 5 case. Okay. Now, this was the case of 5 African-American Hispanic teenagers who were, it was alleged that they brutally beat and raped a young white woman who was a jogger in Central Park. Okay. Donald Trump, we know Donald Trump took out a full-page ad in 4 major New York daily newspapers calling for the death penalty to be brought back, okay, and saying all types of hateful things in the article, all right, in the newspaper ad. Now, Donald Trump stepped in, denounced Mayor Ed Koch's call for peace. Mayor Ed Koch was the mayor of the city of New York back at this time. Donald Trump stepped in, denounced Mayor Ed Koch's call for peace, and bought full-page newspaper ads calling for the death penalty. The 5 teenagers spent years in prison before being exonerated. It was found out that they did not commit the crime. In retrospect, they suffered a modern version of a lynching, and Donald Trump played a part in whipping up the crowds. Now, they also received a settlement from the city. They sued the city of New York, received a settlement. Donald Trump called the settlement a disgrace. He never retracted. He never apologized for the ads or anything like this that he placed. Okay. Now, as Donald Trump moved into casinos, discrimination followed. In the 1980s, according to a former Donald Trump casino worker, whose name is Kip Brown, K-I-P, Kip Brown. Kip Brown was quoted by the New Yorker magazine, saying, quote, when Donald and Ivana, okay, came to the casino, the bosses would order all the black people off the floor. They put us all in the back, end quote. Okay? They put us all in the back. Now, in a 1991 book by John O'Donnell, who had been president of the Trump Plaza and Hotel, the president of the Trump Plaza Hotel and Casino in Atlantic City, he quoted Trump as criticizing an African-American accountant and saying, quote, black guys counting my money. I hate it. The only kind of people I want counting my money are short guys that wear yarmulkes every day. I think that the guy is lazy, and it's probably not his fault because laziness is a trait in blacks. Laziness is a trait in blacks. It really is. I believe that is not anything they can control, end quote. Okay. Now this is what John O'Donnell said that Donald Trump said in the book in 1991. John O'Donnell was he was a former president of the Trump Plaza Hotel and Casino in Atlantic City. Okay. Now, Donald Trump eventually denied making these comments, but in 1997, in an interview for Playboy magazine, he conceded and said, quote, "The stuff O'Donnell wrote about me is probably true," end quote. Now, there's a lot of other things that point to Donald Trump's bigotry, and it's a consistent theme. Now, Omarosa may not be able to see it. Katrina Pearson, his national spokesperson, who's half African-American, half black, she may not be able to see it. The pastors, Pastor Darrell Scott and Pastor James Davis, I think his name is, these other black pastors who are running around supporting Donald Trump, trying to convince African-Americans to vote against their own interests. Okay. Also keep in mind that Donald Trump has not denounced his own party in states like Wisconsin and North Carolina and Texas and other states, passing voter ID laws that target African Americans and make it harder for African Americans to vote. They are strategically targeting, putting laws in place to make it harder for African Americans to vote or keep us from voting so that they can win. He has not come out and denounced that. What he has done is talked about voter fraud. As recently as the last couple of weeks, he spoke in Pennsylvania, and he dog whistled to the predominantly white audience for them to. He said the only way we're going to lose in Pennsylvania is if there's cheating involved. Okay, and he called on them to, and he said cheating in certain parts of Pennsylvania. And he called on them to be poll watchers, to go and watch the polls to make sure people aren't cheating. Now, a lot of people, and I'm one of them, a lot of people interpret this as him talking about Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, which has a large African American population, and saying the only way that he's going to lose in Pennsylvania is if cheating happens. So you have to go watch those black people to make sure they don't cheat. At the same time, it's his party that he is now the head of because he has accepted the nomination from the Republican National Convention. Okay, it's his party that has consistently and is currently doing this, trying to implement harsher voter ID laws to keep African Americans from voting. He has not, to my knowledge, and I've seen over 100 speeches that he's done in dozens of interviews that he's done. Okay, I watch between 6 and 10 hours of MSNBC a day. As many of you know, I do national radio 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, the Michael Imhotep Show. I also do local radio here in Detroit on 9:10 a.m. the Superstation. Okay, I also guest host Roland Martin's national radio show on a regular basis. All right, and I'm a talk show host, researcher, lecturer as well. Okay, visit my website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com for more information. All my DVD presentations are there, articles I've written, video clips, all at AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Okay, so all of this is going on. He brings on Stephen Bannon as his campaign CEO. Okay, who's the co-founder of a white supremacist website, Breitbart News. He has Rudy Giuliani, another bigot. He has Rudy Giuliani as an advisor. Okay, so all of this is taking place now. If we look at some recent things that Donald Trump has done or said, okay, now Donald Trump's suggestions that President Obama was born in Kenya. We know he was the leader of the birther movement back in 2012. Not only was he the leader of the birther movement, he actually said in interviews that he hired private investigators to go to Hawaii to dig up dirt on President Obama. And he said, you won't believe what they have found. You won't believe what they're finding out. He never revealed what they found out. Okay, he never revealed any of this stuff. He's just constantly pushing this, trying to delegitimize the citizenship of President Barack Obama, first African-American president. Contrary to popular belief, Black John Hanson was not president. We need to stop telling that lie. I've done a lecture about it. I wrote extensive article providing facts and evidence entitled "No, the Black John Hanson Was Never President." Go to AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, read that article. There were two John Hansons. You had a white senator from Maryland named John Hanson, and you had the black John Hanson, some call him a Moore, okay, who was a senator to Liberia, all right? And when you see the picture of John Hanson, if you look closely, the famous one is called a daguerreotype. You notice that's a picture, not a painting. Well, photographic cameras weren't invented till the 1820s. They weren't available for commercial usage to the 1830s. But when you research John Hanson, who was the president of the Continental Congress, you read that he died in 1783. He was president from 1781 to 1782, died in 1783. So the question I ask is, how do you have a picture of a man taken with a camera that was invented 40, 50 years after he died? Nobody can answer that question for me. There were two John Hansons. Read my article. Okay, so we have Donald Trump's suggestion that President Barack Obama was born in Kenya, okay, leader of the birthing movement. His insinuations that President Obama was admitted to Ivy League schools only because of affirmative action. Here's another thing, attacking not just the legitimacy of his presidency, but attacking his intelligence and saying, oh, the only reason why you got into that school is because, the only reason why you got into Harvard is because of affirmative action, okay? Now, he was the head of the Harvard Law Review also. He was the editor of the Harvard Law Review as well, all right? Now, if we talk about affirmative action, which a lot of people really don't want to talk about, white women have been the #1 beneficiary of affirmative action. Donald Trump really doesn't want to talk about that. Donald Trump doesn't want to present his transcripts from the Wharton School of Business and talk about how he got into the Wharton School of Business as well. Maybe it was because of who his father was. We don't know if his father made a donation to the Wharton School of Business or what have you, okay? But he hasn't produced his transcripts. I find that very interesting, okay? Now, so he talks about affirmative action and says President Obama was only admitted to Ivy League schools only because of affirmative action. Now, the other thing that people have to understand about affirmative action, and a lot of white people don't understand this, and it's not their fault. They just been miseducated. You don't get graded on a curve. There's no affirmative action curve when you are actually in college. Okay, I want people to understand that everybody's held to the same standard for your grades and class and things like this. There's no affirmative action curve in college. When you graduate from college, you didn't graduate because of affirmative action. There is no, you had to do the same work everybody else had to do. You had to earn the same amount of credit hours everybody else had to do. Okay, so I want to make this clear. All right, now, also recently, Donald Trump's denunciations of Mexican immigrants, as he stated, quote, early in his campaign, quote, in many cases, criminals, drug dealers, rapists, end quote. Okay, he was saying Mexico was sending, they're sending, you go over there, they're sending criminals and drug dealers and rapists. Okay, then he added to mitigate what he was saying, some of them are good people that are coming over. Some of them are good people that are coming over illegally. What's interesting is that he doesn't want to talk about illegal European immigrants like from Slovenia, because that's where his wife is from. And if you look at the article from Politico.com, you look at the article from the Daily Mail in the last few weeks, there's cause for concern, and some people say overwhelming evidence, there's cause for concern that Melania Trump may have been in the U.S. in 1995 working illegally, okay? They don't want to talk about that. They don't want to talk about illegal European immigrants coming to this country. I find that very interesting. Now, so also we have Donald Trump's call for a temporary ban on Muslims entering the United States, which is ridiculous, and that's not going to work at all. Okay, it's not going to work. What are you going to ask them? What's your religion? Are you a Muslim? Things like this. What if they are actually a Muslim and they say, no, I'm a Christian? 90% of what Christians believe, Muslims believe. 90% of what Christians believe, Muslims believe. The overwhelming majority of the characters who are in the Bible, they're in the Quran also. They may just have different names or slightly different names. Like Jesus in the Quran is called the prophet Isa. Okay, because the letter J didn't exist in 1630 AD. A lot of people don't know this. The letter J did not exist in 1630 AD. So even in the story, quote unquote story of Jesus Christ, his mother Mary didn't even call him Jesus because the letter J didn't even exist. Read The Historical Origins of Christianity by Dr. Walter Williams. Chapter 9 deals with the whole history of the letter J. The letter J is derived from the letter I. This is why your 26-character alphabet, the letter J comes after the letter I. It's not by accident. And this is why when you actually study the King James Version of the Bible, commissioned in the year 1600 AD by King James Stewart I, and then it comes out in 1611, he didn't write it, by the way. He was illiterate. He could neither read nor write. He had about 42 scholars to write his version of the Bible. Even in that version, Jesus was referred to as Jesus, because the letter J didn't exist. Okay, so we have to study this history. All right, and this is what we do at the African History Network. All right, now his calls for a temporary ban on Muslims entering the United States, his dismissal of an American-born judge of Mexican ancestry as a Mexican who cannot fairly hear his case. Now, this is his Trump University fraud case. This is a whole nother thing. This is deep. When you do research on Trump University, this is straight gangster, what was going on. It's alleged that they were, and I've seen interviews with some of the people who paid $25,000, $30,000 to learn the secrets of Donald Trump at Trump University. And they were allegedly conned out of their money, okay? So his dismissal of an American-born judge of Mexican ancestry as a Mexican who cannot fairly hear his case. And this is the judge who's presiding over the fraud case dealing with Trump University out of the state of New York. Now, what's interesting here is the judge, the reason why you haven't heard from the judge is because he's under a gag order. He can't defend himself. Donald Trump ran on a tyrant talking about this judge, knowing that the judge could not defend himself. Okay? To me, that's a punk. But, okay, that's who Donald Trump is. Now, he also retweeted a graphic suggesting 81% of white murder victims are killed by African Americans. The actual figure is 15% of white murder victims are killed by African Americans. About 83% of white people who are killed in this country are killed by other white people. Okay, he retweets this. He also retweeted messages from white supremacists or Nazi sympathizers, including two from an account called White Genocide, with a photo of the American Nazi Party's founder. Now, Donald Trump repeatedly and vehemently denies any racism, and he has deleted some offensive tweets. The Daily Stormer, a neo-Nazi racist website that has endorsed Donald Trump, sees that as going, quote, full wink, 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 end quote. Okay. So you can check out this article here. This is called, Is Donald Trump a Racist? Is Donald Trump a Racist? By Nicholas Kristof, July 23rd, 2016. Just last month, July 23rd, 2016. The New York Times, okay? He goes on to conclude in the article. He says, my view is that, quote unquote, racist can be a loaded word, a conversation stopper more than a clarifier, and that we should be careful not to use it simply as an epithet. Moreover, Muslims and Latinos can be of any race, which is true. So some of those statements technically reflect not so much racism as bigotry. Bigotry is hatred. Racist is a tricky term because when you study racism, and I've written articles about this, if you read my article, white racism versus black racism, most people are confused about what racism is. When you read that article, I talk about how racism is a system of advantage and privilege distributed based upon race. Racism is a system of advantage and privilege distributed based upon race. Racism occurs when one race of people control the majority of the wealth, power, resources, benefits, privileges, land, access to opportunity, money, media, and they use that to marginalize, subordinate, and do harm to another race of people. Okay? And all of this comes out of the ideology of white supremacy. Read that article. I deal with racism, the concept of racism from a historical perspective. Okay, so they talk about how when you deal with Muslims and Hispanics or Latinos, they could be of any race, so that's more dealing with bigotry than racism. But he goes on to say it's also true that with any single statement, it is possible that Trump misspoke or was misconstrued. And yet, here we have a man who for more than 4 decades has been repeatedly associated with racial discrimination or bigoted comments about so-called minorities, non-Europeans, people of color. Some of them made on television for all to see. While any one episode may be ambiguous, what emerges over more than 4 decades is a narrative arc, a consistent pattern, and I don't see what else to call it but racism. Okay, so check out this article. This is a very, very good article. New York Times, July 23rd, 2016, is Donald Trump a Racist by Nicholas Kristof. Okay, and go to msnbc.com. Check out the interview that Lawrence O'Donnell did last night, August 25th, 2016, with Nicholas Kristof dealing with Donald Trump's bigotry as well. It's just like a 15-minute interview, something like that. Now, Donald Trump recently, since last week, has been trying to reach out, quote unquote, reach out to African Americans in a new way. Okay. Now, last week he brings on, I think it was last Wednesday, he elevated senior advisor Kellyanne Conway to campaign manager. Paul Manafort stayed on as the campaign chair. Okay. Paul Manafort stayed on as the campaign chair. But what happened was, then last Friday, Paul Manafort resigned. Okay. So Kellyanne Conway, who is a pollster, she's never run a presidential campaign before. She's trying to soften his image. Right? So what he's trying to do now is not necessarily appeal to African Americans. He's trying to appeal to white college-educated Republicans, especially white college-educated women, who he has been losing because they don't want to be associated with somebody who is considered a bigot or racist. All right, so he's trying to soften his image. So we know last week he had a campaign stop. He was in Dimondale, Michigan, which is outside of Lansing. He's speaking to about a 93% white audience. He said, quote, "What do you have to lose by trying something new like Trump?" He said, quote, "You're living in your poverty. Your schools are no good. You have no jobs. 58% of your youth is unemployed. What the hell do you have to lose?" End quote. Okay, this was his appeal to African Americans. All right, you're living in your poverty. Now, some people misstated it, said Donald Trump said you're poor. No, he said you're living in your poverty. Poverty is defined as a family of 4 making under $28,000 a year, and 26% of African Americans live in poverty. All 45 million African Americans do not live in poverty. 26% live in poverty. Okay, I'm going to do another broadcast dealing with this. We'll do another video dealing with this. I've dealt with this on my show. I wanted to record this for YouTube, and we'll play this on my show as well. So there was a big article from the Washington Post from August 23rd. 2016, inside Donald Trump's new strategy to counter the view of many that he is racist. Inside Donald Trump's new strategy to counter the view of many that he is racist. They explain this here, but back in April, on This Week with George Stephanopoulos, our man Roland Martin broke this down then, and he said Donald Trump has a Maggie, Becky, and Ashley problem. And he went on to explain what this was about. They don't want to vote for somebody who appears to be racist. And this also causes conflict in households where the wife, Republican college-educated wife, doesn't want to vote for Donald Trump, but the husband does. This is causing conflict in households also. And he's losing support from college-educated white Republican women and college-educated white Republican men as well. All right. Then also check out this other article. August 24th, 2016, just 2 days ago, Donald Trump's description of Black America is offending those living in it. Donald Trump's description of Black America is offending those living in it. And in the article, they quote Donald Trump saying recently, he was in Akron, Ohio on this past Monday. He said, quote, "You'll be able to walk down the street without getting shot." Okay. Quote, "Right now, you walk down the street, you get shot. Look at this. Look at the statistics. We'll straighten it out." End quote. Okay. So he said we have no housing. He also in one of the recent speeches, he said you have no housing, you have no education. So I guess just 45 million African Americans just out in the middle of the street, just getting shot all day, walking down the street, just getting shot all day. I guess this is what he's saying. Okay. Now I wonder what African Americans surround him are going to check him. Is Pastor Darrell Scott going to check him? Is Pastor Mark Barnes going to check him? Is Omarosa or Katrina Pearson or Dr. Ben Carson? Are any of them going to check him and say, whoa, hold up, pull up, man. This is what you're saying, dude. This is inaccurate. Yes, crime exists, but he also said that you're seeing crime at levels that nobody has seen before, which is historically inaccurate. In the article from the Washington Post, "Inside Donald Trump's New Strategy to Counter the View of Many That He is Racist," on page 2 of the article, Monday night in Akron, Ohio, he said, quote, "Poverty, rejection, horrible education, no housing, no homes, no ownership, crime at levels nobody has seen. You can go to war zones in countries that we are fighting in, and it's safer than living in some of the inner cities that are run by Democrats." Two things. Number one, crime levels in the 1990s were much higher than they are right now. So when he says crime at levels that nobody has seen, that's an outright lie. Okay. Yes, African Americans have lost 53% of our wealth over the last few years because of the downturn in the housing industry, late 2007. Yes, that's true. But to say that we don't own any homes anymore is just an outright lie. Okay. Then also he wants to talk about cities run by Democrats. Well, a lot of these cities run by Democrats are in states run by Republicans. Republican governor, Republican dominated state legislature. Detroit is one of them. In the city, in Detroit City, in the state of Michigan, Republican dominated state legislator, Republican governor, emergency manager imposed on almost every African American dominated city in the state of Michigan by a Republican governor. Detroit, Benton Harbor, Flint, Michigan. You all know about the Flint water crisis. This happened under an emergency manager imposed by a Republican governor. Okay, you look at the city of Detroit, the $18 billion fraudulent bankruptcy imposed by a Republican governor, stripping away the voting rights of the citizens of Detroit, stripping away the power of the city council, a Democratic city council. Okay, you look at an emergency financial manager imposed by a Republican governor, Governor Snyder. Now, yes, you had one under Democratic governor Jennifer Granholm, but the majority of the damage, I would say, has been done under this Republican governor, Governor Snyder. Okay, so you can't just say, oh, you're in a city that has a Democratic that's dominated by Democrats, okay, Democratic mayor, things like this, city council.